There was a time when a single map could get you killed. Not metaphorically, not in a career-ending kind of way, literally beheaded. And the wildest part is that the most famous map from that era, the one everyone points to when they tell this story, isn't actually the one worth dying for. The real story is buried underneath it, and it's so much stranger. So here's what this video is actually about. You've probably heard of the Piri Reis map, the 1513 Ottoman chart that supposedly shows Antarctica before Europeans ever reached it. And you've probably heard some version of the story that the man who made it was executed because of it. That version is wrong in almost every detail, but the true story sitting underneath it involves a spy pretending to sell horses, a map smuggled across Europe for 12 gold coins, the document that literally named the continent of America, and a master cartographer who genuinely did get beheaded, just not the one you've been told about. I've dug into the verified history on all three of these, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why the real story hits harder than any legend ever could. Let's start with the heist. In 1502, a man named Alberto Cantino arrived in Lisbon with a cover story. He was there to trade horses. He'd been sent by the Duke of Ferrara with the formal intention of horse trading, while secretly collecting information on Portuguese discoveries. And Portugal at that moment was sitting on the most valuable intelligence in the world. Their navigators had just reached India, just touched the coast of Brazil, just mapped coastlines that no European had ever seen. At a time when knowledge of new territories lent expanding nations great strategic and commercial superiority, such maps were guarded as state secrets. Portugal had built an entire system around keeping this secret. The Padrão Real, the royal register, was the official and quasi-secret Portuguese master map during the Age of Exploration, used as a template for the maps of all official Portuguese expeditions. Pilots were bound by oaths of secrecy, required to deposit their logs and instruments at the Casa da India upon return, preventing private retention or foreign leakage. And the penalty for letting any of this out? Cartographers were sworn to secrecy under penalty of death or exile. This wasn't a policy on paper that nobody enforced. This was the law that every mapmaker in Lisbon lived under, every single day. Cantino knew all of this. He walked into that environment anyway, found an unnamed Portuguese cartographer willing to risk his life, and paid him. He procured a copy through bribery of a Portuguese cartographer, paying 12 gold ducats, a substantial sum equivalent to several months' wages for a skilled artisan. Cantino's surviving correspondence with the Duke, dated October and November 1502, details the transaction's risks and costs, confirming he smuggled the chart out of Portugal covertly to evade detection, arriving in Ferrara by late November. Think about what that cartographer did. He copied the Crown's most classified document, handed it to a foreign spy, and accepted money for it. He knew what the law said. He did it anyway. We don't know his name. We never will. But the map he produced is one of the most important documents in the history of the world. The Cantino Planisphere, completed in 1502, is the second known chart to have depicted the New World, and it included unpublished information on Portuguese trade routes and the ongoing discovery of the coastline of modern-day Brazil. As one of the earliest surviving maps to depict Portuguese discoveries in both the New World and the Indian Ocean, it offers invaluable insights into the geopolitical, commercial, and navigational imperatives that shaped the Age of Discovery. The data on that map, copied from the stolen Portuguese master chart, fed directly into other maps made across Europe. And one of those maps, built partly on the Cantino's stolen data, was the 1507 Waldseemüller map, the first map to use the word America. The document that named an entire continent traces its information back to an act of cartographic espionage funded by an Italian duke through a fake horse trader. Now here's the thing I told you I'd get back to. The map's afterlife is almost as unbelievable as the theft. Lost for centuries and later found in a butcher shop in Modena, the Cantino Planisphere is now preserved in the Biblioteca Estense in Italy. At some point after the Duke of Ferrara died, the map passed through various hands, was cut apart, repurposed as a room divider, and ended up decorating a butcher's shop. A library director named Giuseppe Boni found it there in 1859, recognized what it was, and brought it back. The map that named America spent time as a meat shop screen. It survived. The original Padrón Real, it was copied from, did not. The original Padrón Real has been lost. The stolen copy outlived the thing it was stolen from. So that's the real map worth dying for story. But I want to stay in this world for a second, because there's a name attached to the most famous map of this era that almost everyone gets wrong. And the true version of his story is genuinely tragic in a way the legend isn't. Before we get there, if you're finding this as interesting as I am, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. I'm doing a $100 Amazon gift card giveaway to celebrate when this channel hits 1,000 subscribers. I'll randomly pick the winner once we hit that milestone, so subscribe, comment, and follow the journey. Now, back to the story. Piri Reis was an Ottoman Turkish cartographer, admiral, navigator, and corsair. He is best known for his 1513 world map and his nautical atlas, the Cantino Planisphere, or Book of the Sea. The 1513 map is the one that gets all the attention, the fragment that supposedly shows Antarctica, the one people point to as proof of ancient advanced civilizations, and it's genuinely remarkable. The 1929 rediscovery of his first world map during renovations to the Topkapı Palace in Istanbul increased interest in his work, in part because it cites many contemporary Portuguese explorers and a now-lost map by Christopher Columbus. Think about that. The map references a Columbus chart that has been missing since 1498. Piri Reis drew his map partly from a source we no longer have. That alone is extraordinary. But here's what most people don't know. He is primarily known today for his maps and charts collected in his Cantino Planisphere, a book that contains detailed information on navigation, as well as very accurate charts describing the important ports and cities of the Mediterranean Sea. The famous 1513 fragment was actually a footnote to his real-life's work. The man spent decades producing the most detailed navigational atlas of his era, rose through the Ottoman military, and became an admiral commanding fleets across the Indian Ocean. In 1547, Piri had risen to the rank of admiral as the commander of the Ottoman fleet in the Indian Ocean and admiral of the fleet in Egypt, headquartered in Suez. He recaptured Aden from the Portuguese in 1548, followed in 1552 by the capture of Muscat, which Portugal had occupied since 1507, and the strategically important island of Kish. Turning further east, Piri Reis captured the island of Hormuz in the Strait of Hormuz, at the entrance of the Persian Gulf. This is a man in his 80s, commanding warships, fighting the Portuguese across the Indian Ocean, and then he retreated. Courtly intrigue and whispers of personal cowardice led to his downfall. Accused of fleeing the battle to safeguard himself and the great treasure he had accumulated from his long years at sea, Piri Reis was condemned by the Sultan and beheaded. He returned to Egypt, an old man approaching the age of 90, the mapmaker who had charted the known world, who had served the Ottoman Empire for decades, who had drawn a map from a lost Columbus source, killed by the empire he built his life serving, over a battle he lost and a treasure his enemies said he was protecting. Not because of a map, not in 1513. He was executed following his retreat from the siege of Hormuz Island at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, 40 years after he drew his famous chart. And the world largely forgot Piri Reis until 1929, when a portion of his 1513 world map was rediscovered at Topkapı Palace by a group of historians. The man died in disgrace. The map slept in a palace for nearly 4 centuries. Then it woke up and made him famous. But remember, I promised you a mapmaker who genuinely was executed because of the world he lived in. The world of maps as weapons, maps as state secrets, maps worth more than gold. That person is Guillaume Le Testu, and almost nobody tells his story. Guillaume Le Testu was a French privateer, explorer and navigator, and one of the foremost cartographers of his time, an author of the Dieppe maps. His maps were distinguished by their sophistication and detail. They influenced generations of cartographers, navigators, and explorers. He was a master of his craft. He was also, when the situation called for it, a pirate. And in 1573, those two things collided in a jungle in Panama. On March 23, 1573, Le Testu unexpectedly encountered Sir Francis Drake near Cantino, Panama. It was during this meeting, having brought news of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, that he offered to join Drake in a final raid against a Spanish mule train en route to Nombre de Dios before leaving the area. Drake was already in the area raiding Spanish treasure routes. Le Testu had 70 men and a warship. Together, they went after one of the most heavily loaded supply lines in the Spanish Empire. The attack was a complete success, and nearly 30 tons of gold and silver were captured by Drake and Le Testu. There was so much treasure that the privateers were unable to carry all the silver off and buried what remained. Drake got away. Le Testu didn't. When Drake's men returned, they reported that the Frenchman and his companions had been caught by Spanish soldiers and executed. Le Testu was beheaded. His head was taken back to Nombre de Dios, where it was displayed in the marketplace. A master cartographer, one of the finest mapmakers of the 16th century, beheaded by the Spanish in Panama and his head put on display. That is the real story the title of this video was reaching for. Not a legend, not a misattributed date. A real man, a real execution, in the exact era when maps were the most dangerous objects on Earth. So here's where we've actually arrived. There was a time, a specific, documented, historically real time, when geography was classified intelligence. Knowledge is power, and no knowledge was more assiduously coveted by European nations in the early 16th century than the information recorded on nautical maps. Portugal built a secret master map and made leaking it a capital offense. A spy stole a copy of it for 12 gold coins and smuggled it across Europe disguised as a horse trader. That stolen map fed the document that named America, then survived as butcher shop decor for decades before anyone recognized what it was. The most famous cartographer of the era, Piri Reis, drew a map in 1513 that referenced a Columbus source nobody has seen since, and then lived another 40 years before being beheaded by his own sultan over a lost battle. And a French master mapmaker named Guillaume Le Testu was genuinely executed, his head displayed in a marketplace in Panama, because he lived in a world where maps were worth dying over. The legend you've heard is false. The real history is better. And the anonymous Portuguese cartographer who copied the Padrão Real and handed it to Cantino for 12 gold coins, the one whose name we'll never know, might be the most consequential person in this entire story. He risked everything. He probably died for it. And the map he made outlasted empires. If this is the kind of history you want more of, the stuff that gets buried under the cleaner, simpler version, there's another video right here that goes just as deep. Watch that one next. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and drop a comment below so you're in the running for that $100 Amazon gift card giveaway when we hit 1,000 subscribers. I'll see you in the next one.